Good evening, class. My name is Maya Richardson. I'll be presenting my final research paper and PowerPoint presentation to you guys on, which is my topic, human trafficking, sex exploitation of women and children in Iran and Egypt. I will go over the introduction part in my final research paper, and it states, women and children are often viewed as victims of conflict targeted towards sexual and gender-based violence, especially in the Middle Eastern and Northern African countries, specifically Egypt and Iran, in which human trafficking and sex exploitation has become a widespread epidemic. Since the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1325, in which Egypt is signed, and it brings me to question if the woman participation within the political arena, parliament arena, would help the efforts to curb human trafficking and sex exploitation of women and children if we focus more so on education, socioeconomic status, and gender inequalities. Would this improve the efforts to curb human trafficking, sex exploitation of women and children? Our definitions: human trafficking, the illegal trade of humans against their will for the purpose of sexual exploitation, forced labor, and modern-day slavery. Your next slide will go into sex exploitation. Sex exploited is if selling sex in exchange for money, food, shelter, and drugs, transportation, or anything else of value is forced into sexual activity through violence or threats, or manipulation, or through bribes, lies, or other means. I will go into Resolution SRES 1325. It's a policy that urges all actors to increase their participation of women and incorporate gender perspectives in the United Nations Peace and Security Efforts in Council. Gender Inequality Index (GII) reflects gender-based inequalities and reproductive health, empowerment, economic activity, education, socioeconomic status. I will focus on a few. My variables will be gender, socioeconomic status of women, education of women and children, and the participation of women and children within the political arena, parliament arena. Social economics is the study of ethical and social causes and consequences of economic behavior, institution, organization, theory, and policy. This is also the effects of economics and that they have within one society or within a community. The statement of problem. As countries in the Middle East and Northern region of Africa, especially Iran and Egypt, have faced many delays in the efforts to curb human trafficking and sex exploitation of women and children. In both countries, it has been allowed and accepted that the security of women and children has taken a backseat on many political agendas, commonly because these parliaments are viewed and operate as a patriarchal system. In many readings and findings, it is argued that the socioeconomic, gender, and education and the underrepresentation of women within the political arena has many negative effects on efforts being placed to curb human trafficking and sex exploitation within Iran and Egypt. Gender, my first variable. According to the Gender Inequality Index, GII reflects gender-based inequalities. I will focus more on gender. Like I said, socioeconomic, the involvement and participation of women within the political arena and socioeconomic status. Starting, Iran, 3% of women control seats in parliament versus Egypt, which is only 2% of women controlling seats within their own parliament. Women and children enrollment in secondary higher level education, however, has shockingly risen in high numbers. 62.1% of women have reached secondary or higher level education versus Egypt, which is 113 percentile of women obtaining an education compared to their male counterparts. Lastly, economic activity measured by women in the labor market. And this is just their influence within the labor market, their influence within the economic society, their voice being heard as far as economics goes. 16.4% of women are involved in the labor market compared to 72.5% of their male counterparts, which is very low. Egypt is 19% of women participating in the labor market compared to 78% of their male counterparts. Gender. Article 20 of Constitution of the IRI, women shall receive equal protection under the legal system. Iran ranked 6th out of the worst for women's rights out of all Arab states. Iran consecutively have ranked in Tier 3 in the Human Trafficking in Person report. Compared to Egypt reported that 99.3% of women has experienced or encountered some form of sexual harassment. And in 2013, a poll of gender experts ranked Egypt one of the worst for women's rights out of all Arab states. The reason why I pointed out gender within my research is because as soon as we realize, or Egypt and Iran realize, that gender plays a major factor in why the efforts to curb human trafficking is stagnant or there are no improvements is because you have to recognize that women or children are like half of your society. Until you acknowledge half of your society, then the issues of human trafficking and sex exploitation will continue to plague many communities, will continue to plague many families of desperation for the needs of money. I went as far as back as looking at some shared common interests of a couple of two rulers, one in Iran and one in Egypt. In Iran, Mohammed Reza Shah, the imperial majesty, and Gamal Abdul Nasser, the second president of Egypt, both shared common interests. And they ratified in 1928 under the Iranian Civil Code, women and children were protected. Women legal age to marry was set at 15 years of age. Sexual violence towards women and children were held in court, and men were actually prosecuted when women had legal rights to custody of their children. And what that means is that at some time they realized that when you empower women, then a lot of pressure of feeling to involve themselves in human trafficking, sex exploitation wouldn't seem as a burden to them, or wouldn't even be a point of not even a topic of discussion. Sexual violence towards women and children were held in court, and men were actually prosecuted at the time. And they showed that prosecuted men put fear in men's heart, that they knew that if they engaged in sexual violence towards women and children, that they were actually going to be prosecuted. Also, women having legal rights and custody over their children then at this time also showed that they had rights to where their children will be at, far as who had control over their children. A lot of people weren't selling their children into brothels or bribes because they needed income. Gamal Abdul Nasser granted women the rights to vote for the first time in Egypt, which acknowledged and granted women civic and social rights. And with that being said, Gamal Abdul Nasser understood that in order to uplift a country and to get them out of the human trafficking and sex exploitation, for this not to plague their country so much, you have to recognize women as a whole. And that's why he enacted that law, so women could have the right to vote. He also enacted in 1956 Egyptian constitution forbidding gender-based discrimination. And at a time, and when he enacted that new law, the society was as a whole. There was no discrimination. There was no splits. They recognized women as a part of citizenship, and when you are recognized as a part of your society, you are understood better. You are respected more. And I shared these two individuals because they both had common interests and same common goals. Socioeconomics, human trafficking, sex exploitation of women and children thrive due to desperation and economic pressure on oneself or the family as a whole. In many cases, women have no control over their livelihood, and women being considered more as a financial burden. In many instances in Iran and Egypt, when I was doing my research and findings, many women subject themselves to human trafficking because economic pressure. They need to take care of their household. They sell their children into brothels because they take bribes to better improve their livelihood and the livelihood of their family. And they also view girls as a financial burden, into diaries and when they get married. But when I was reading in Sex and World Peace, and also in the Half the Sky, they have this new phenomenal microfinance program going on. And this is where women who are in the community, maybe of 25 or more, they invest in each other to start small businesses. A way to keep women and children out of prostitution, to lower the rates of human trafficking, sex exploitation of women and children, is to economically boost women within a community, is what I'm trying to say. It would sustain a better livelihood for them. They will be able to make better decisions. Women are proven in both studies, Sex and World Peace and Half of the Sky. The women are better spenders. They're more responsible spenders. And they can also help make decisions within their community. Their voices will be heard within a society where women are looked upon as nothing but baby breeders. But if you look them as a subject of compatibility, as far as women can bring as much money to the table just as a man, if you start these programs within a lot of these countries, Iran and Egypt, if they implemented these programs more, then the economic boost of women would actually improve the efforts to curb human trafficking and sex exploitation, and one would not feel pressured to involve themselves into prostitution or house slaves. My next slide will be going into education. GI index, Iran women enrollment in the secondary higher level education is 69%, whereas Egypt is 113%. Both Iran and Egypt has nearly closed the gap between gender-based literacy. Women entrance exams are mainly in the medical, social welfare, and public affairs sector, in which women exceed their male counterparts in all three fields. Education and its high enrollment of women in relations to human trafficking and sex exploitation in Iran and Egypt resulted in an inconclusive finding. The reason why is because I find it very hard to believe that these women who are very articulate obtain education, they're obtaining education and passing exams way beyond and far beyond their male counterparts, but still